All right, let's dive right in. We're looking at a crisis unfolding in what feels like real time. It's 2026, and the entire world is pretty much holding its breath as a massive military showdown builds in the Middle East. So right now, we're seeing the biggest U.S. military buildup since the Iraq War back in 2003. And when I say buildup, I mean a full-on armada. You've got the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford carrier strike groups steaming towards the region. We're talking dozens of F-35s, Strike Eagles, the works. The official line? It's Maximum Pressure 2.0, designed to force Iran into a new nuclear deal. But you have to wonder if it's maybe for something more. But here is where the story takes a fascinating turn. A twist that's got analysts all over the world talking. As the US gears up, it made a call to its oldest, closest ally, the United Kingdom, for support. And the UK's answer? No. An almost unheard of refusal. And understanding that no is absolutely key to grasping just how different and frankly how dangerous this whole situation really is. So what on earth could be big enough to crack the famous special relationship at a time like this? Well, it's not just one thing. It's a really complex mix of international law, messy politics, and a deep, deep fear of what happens next. Okay, first up, let's talk liability. It really comes down to international law. British officials are worried, and I mean really worried, that if they let the US launch what looks like a preemptive strike from UK soil, a strike to prevent an attack that hasn't happened yet, it could make Britain legally on the hook for an illegal act of war. And that is a huge legal risk they're just not willing to take. Reason number two is a very specific political fight over a tiny but incredibly important set of islands called the Chagos, home to the massive Diego Garcia military base. Here's the problem. In 2025, the UK finally agreed to hand sovereignty of the islands back to Mauritius. The US administration, they are furious about this, and it has become a major, major source of tension. And look, this isn't some quiet, behind-the-scenes disagreement. This quote from the US president just lays it all out in the open. Calling the deal stupid and then directly tying it to military cooperation, that turns a diplomatic spat into a public showdown. It just makes it that much harder for the UK to give in. And the third reason? Honestly, this might be the biggest one. The UK, and pretty much all of Europe, sees a totally different endgame here. They don't see some clean, surgical strike. They see a regional firestorm, a conflict that could absolutely torch global energy markets and lead to a domino effect of collapsing states across the entire region. So you have to ask, how did we get to this point? A crisis like this doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. To really get why we're on the brink in 2026, you gotta look back over the last 100 years at a series of decisions that basically paved the way for the chaos we're seeing today. It really boils down to three man-made problems. First, the map itself. After World War I, European powers drew these straight lines that completely ignored who actually lived there, trapping rival ethnic and religious groups together. Second, the resource curse. You put the world's largest oil reserves in one place, and global powers are always going to be meddling. And third, the power vacuum. When a dictator falls, like Assad in Syria in 2024, it just creates this mad dash for control. And when you lay it out like this on a timeline, you can literally draw a straight line from the past to the present. The borders drawn in 1916 created the powder keg. The 2003 invasion of Iraq lit a fuse by completely upending the balance of power. The fall of Assad in 2024 created a new vacuum. And here we are, with an American armada sailing in the Gulf. It's all connected. Okay, so that's the history. But this isn't just about old grievances. What we're seeing now is a totally new great game. It's a global chessboard with more players, much higher stakes, and brand new rules. At the very heart of this is a regional Cold War between the two heavyweights, Shia-led Iran on one side and Sunni-led Saudi Arabia on the other. They almost never fight each other directly. Instead, they do it through proxies, funding opposite sides in wars from Yemen to Lebanon, each one trying to become the dominant power in the Middle East. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because you can see how the whole world is getting pulled in. You've got the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia all lined up to contain Iran. Then there's Iran and its axis of resistance trying to push the US out. But look at the new players. China is backing Iran because it needs Iranian oil and wants to challenge the West. And then you have India playing a very careful game of strategic hedging, basically trying to protect the millions of its citizens working in the Gulf without getting crushed by sanctions. It's an incredibly complex web. And that right there, that's the single most important thing to understand about this crisis. For decades, the Middle East was treated like a playground for Western powers. Well, that era is over. China and India are here, and they've completely changed the game for everybody. And these guys aren't just sitting on the sidelines. China just handed Iran a major tech upgrade, an AI-powered satellite shield to help them track U.S. forces. At the same time, the U.S. is putting a massive squeeze on India. They forced India to cut all its funding for a key Iranian port and sign a new trade deal, all on the condition that they back away from Tehran. You can see the squeeze happening from all sides. So, you've got this American armada, a key ally saying no, a regional Cold War, and new global powers picking sides. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. Where does this go from here? Right now, it looks like there are three possible ways this could all play out. Scenario A, let's call it the grand bargain. This is the best case outcome. The military pressure actually works, and a weakened Iranian government agrees to a tough new nuclear deal. Then you have Scenario B, the absolute nightmare. The US strikes, Iran hits back at American bases and oil tankers, and the whole region just erupts into war. And finally, there's Scenario C, the suspended crisis. This is a tense, Cold War-style standoff where the US just keeps its forces there, hoping the Iranian regime collapses on its own. And if you want to know what the stakes of that nightmare Scenario B really are, look no further. $150. That's where experts think a barrel of oil could go if a war breaks out and the Strait of Hormuz is shut down. That's not a regional problem. That's a global economic heart attack. So that's the bottom line. Is this massive military force a brilliant act of diplomacy, a gun to the head to force a peaceful deal? Or is it the final fatal push that triggers that regional firestorm everyone's so afraid of? The answer to that question is going to define not just 2026, but probably the rest of the decade.